Hello and welcome to Ops Area Working Group and the Combined Ops Area here at IETF 105 in, I'm told, Montreal. Bless you. Let's, I'll kick this into full screen. This is an official IETF Working Group meeting. As such, the note well applies. I assume many people in here have read this thoroughly, but if not, I will leave it up there for people to glance at and to be aware of how your contributions work here at the IETF. So do be aware this is a formal meeting and the note well applies. Thank you. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Joe Clark, Tien Ren, my co-chair here. We are the chairs for the Ops Area Working Group session. We will kick this off, and we have a fairly packed agenda, though not as packed as some in the past. The good news is we've seen a lot of mailing list activity this time around. We've got some new adopted documents as well, so we'll cover those. After the Ops Area Working Group portion, we will hand it over to our area directors to do the Ops Area portion of the meeting. Before we go any further, may I ask for a jabber scribe only, and I'm kind of looking at Joel Yeagley over here in the corner of my eye. Joel has agreed to do it. That's fantastic. In terms of minutes, we do have an Etherpad. You see the link up there. I'm currently in it. But what I did last time was I just transcribed this off the YouTube thing, and that worked pretty well. So I'm going to say we'll do that again. However, we would appreciate that if anyone wants to note something down in one of these sessions, in one of the presentations, please join the Etherpad and mark that in there so we can capture it officially in the minutes. That would be fantastic. You see the link to the slides there. The slides are posted in our in our materials section for this meeting, and they are in the order that they will be presented. We have 4 remote presentations this time. The most I've ever had is 0 remote presentations, so this is substantially more. We'll see how that goes. They've all been notified. We've worked with Meet Echo. So we will we'll attempt to do the remote presentations when they come up. Have people signed the blue sheets? I think they just came back up to the front. If we need some blue sheet action, Tien Ren will go and deliver that. Please make sure you sign so that we can always right-size the room for future meetings. Any questions, anything with the agenda? What we are going to do is cover these documents where the status of our adopted documents are, and then go into the presentations. Okay, so where we're at right now, we have 4. One just got adopted recently, 4 working group documents. The TACAX draft is gone through a round of IESG review. The authors have replied to most of the discusses. We are awaiting a updated revision of the TACAX draft. I'm told, I contacted the authors. They weren't able to do one prior to this meeting. However, they expect an update to address the discusses as have gone out on the mailing list in the next 2 weeks. So we will expect to see an update then. We recently adopted the network telemetry framework on draft. That has become a working group document that's been presented here a couple of times. The secure device initialization that Warren and others have written, that was recently adopted. That has got some good initial feedback, and it might be in a fairly stable state. So we would encourage all of you to read all of these drafts and comment on the mailing list. And finally, just last night, I think, the TACAX Yang module draft was switched over. And this is a complement to the Radius portion of the IETF system module to be able to configure TACAX server parameters. And that will be presented, the updates of that, and some open issues and requests for feedback from the working group will be presented this morning. Questions on that? So as I mentioned, we've got 10 I believe 10, maybe only 9 presentations, thank you, Tanner, that we'll be going through today. If there are no agenda bashers, we will kick things off. All right, Bo.
I'm here to give some updates about draft IETF tackles young. Thank you.
That's a little better.
So this is, as the chair said, it's just a zero working group draft. And the other change right now is right now, the Tackles Young draft is only contains the Tackles Plus. Oh, here.
It's on, Bo, can you? Yes. Yeah, just a little closer so people can hear.
Okay. So right now, the Tackles Plus only contains the Tackles client parameters. Here is the tree structure of the Tackles Plus Young right now for this version. And this version, we address the comments from the mailing list. And now, like the source interface and the VRF interface, right now, this is the edit since last meeting. For now, there's still some issues here. The first one is the downref tackles protocol. It's now, as the chair said, it's under the IEST, but the tackles protocol right now is information draft, and will be published as an information RPC. So our draft is dependent on this protocol. So we received a comment from the mailing list from Elliot. He proposed to discuss it in the working group. So he said that we should let the AD knows that and should approve this. It's okay. Then the next one.
Can I just real quick on this, Ignis,
Okay.
Warren, do you see any issues insofar as this draft configures the server parameters for TACX if this is a downref, as all Yang modules that I have seen have been standard documents or standards track documents, so would this be an issue?
Ignas Bogdanas. Probably not. The fact is that most of the modules are defined for the standard tracks protocols, and TACX is informational. So that is the source of this.
Okay.
I wouldn't see a problem as such.
Thanks.
The next issue is also from Elliot, that since the working group may have the plan to define the TACOS++, like TLS extension, so maybe that extension will affect the whole the TACOS Young model structure. So here we think there could be two options here, because one is that from the chair that Joe proposed to, will be do another augmentation or next release of this draft to address the TLS extension later. And the other choice is we can leave transfer choice for flexibility in the Young model. So I'd like to hear what the working group think about this.
Feedback on this item?
Ignas Bogdanas. Right now, the document that is being in IEG evaluation is about TACACS. The work on what is beyond the TACACS, with different transports and extensions, that's, I would say it's not chattered or is not happening. That was an agreement that the working group first pushes the TACACS through, and only then the new work with the new item starts. And now, are you certain that the way how you model the TLS extensions for that will be what the working group wants to see from a transport perspective for the new TACACS or for extended TACACS? This seems a little bit kind of timing-wise premature.
Okay.
I'm not saying that this is a wrong way to do things, but in my view, the work on the follow-up of a TACACS protocol should happen first and then the modeling.
Okay.
Speaking as just a contributor, I agree. I think it seems premature. I would just say when that work happens, as that work evolves, that might lead to an augmentation down the road.
Okay, thanks. The other issue is also from Eben. Eben actually proposed this comment at the beginning of this draft, Yang, because I think right now the system model already defined the like how to use the local authentication, and together with Radius and TACACS, no, not include TACACS, but we propose the TACACS plus Yang model. So this should also be considered to be integrated into system Yang model. So right now, although we already defined the TACACS client, but we still need to define the system authentication extension to include the TACACS authentication method in it. So for now, we don't have the think out solution to address that. I think it needs to be a draft to address this, like a system AAA draft to do another augmentation. Because I think there's also a comment from Radius extension working group. They don't like the system AAA, just include the TACACS plus authentication. They want to have the whole, if it's a AAA system AAA draft. But I also think maybe we can add a section to give example for like what will the system authentication would be like if the TACACS plus would be added into it. So right now, I don't have an answer for that. So I think it belongs to Opera's area. So I like to hear the ADs.
Well, my thinking for this is a rather simple change. Do it here and, well, as you call it, an example section. Going NetMod way and publishing a draft which changes one line there, first thing it will take 3 IETF cycles, and that will result in probably over-engineered system. This is something like a point fix. Especially given the discussions about the versioning and changes of the models themselves and possibly taking them out at some point of time away from an RFC publishing process. This seems to be a more practical way. So do it here, inform NetMod.
Okay.
They own the system document.
Yeah.
But it seems to be more practical that this is solved here. It will simply be faster.
Okay. So I would choose the second one. Okay. I also had the comment from the John Hersley. He said that the current TACACS counter include the include the connection opens count, but for like single connection case, then the tackles connection may be more than one session. So maybe we can add sessions count. So I also like to hear more comments from the working group. So can someone? Oh, I think it's a like detail one. I will.
Yeah, just speaking as a contributor, I think that makes sense. I would, yeah, sessions counter makes sense to me at least.
Okay, I will add this one to the updated draft. So that's all the issues related to this draft right now. So I will resolve the comments because John Hasley proposed a more editorial and also some technical drafts comments from. So I will, next step, I will resolve these comments and together with this issued proposed. So I'd like to hear more comments and suggestions from the working group. So that's all for this.
Thanks. I would say we'd all like to hear more comments as well, but it sounds like you have another action to at least handle the initial authentication piece as an augmentation here, whether or not another draft about a more fleshed out AAA happens, that could be proposed, but it seems like that's another piece before we can keep progressing this.
Okay, I will keep on that.
Any other questions on TACX plus Yang module? Okay.
Do you have any timeline when this will be shipped?
Do we have any time? So Ignis has asked, do we have any timeline when? I guess to you, the primary editor / author, what do you think your ETA is on the changes that you want to make?
Oh, I will, within the 2 weeks, I will update a new one.
So within 2 weeks. I think after that, it feels like it's getting to, it seems like a fairly straightforward Yang module, reads that way to me. We've taken out some of the AAA stuff. I think we would be ready to move to last call unless there are any blocking issues that come up on the list.
In fact, that was my question. It's not about when to publish the next version, but when you believe that you have addressed the community comments and socialized that with the user base, and then you will think that this will be done. So in a sense, when this model can be considered stable and shipping?
I think right now our product already support this in our, so I think it's, and also we take in count other vendors' comments, like from Cisco, and I think it's quite stable. Oh, okay. Another.
Yep. I think this is.
So this draft is about SD-WAN service delivering model, and right now it's the first version of individual one. And so I just give a brief description of what is SD-WAN service model is. So it's this SD-WAN service is a connection service will be offered between two or more sites across. This is all customer sites and could be used one or more underlay networks. And what this model for? We think it's just for the service provider scenario, and this model is used for service providers, service orchestrator to dynamically create, modify the SD-WAN service components. The components could be like add a new site or add a new VPN connection between the sites, and also add some application policy component. So since last IETF meeting, we have such changes. And first, we have a new co-author, Charles Echo. Charles is chairing the MEF application committee, and SD1 project is under his lead. So he's very familiar with SD1 service definition. So we, with his help, we make the SD1 MEF SD1 project alignment with this draft. We added the MEF related references. Now MEF has already published its 70 draft specification about SD1 service attributes. And we also add the terminology comparison, because in that way, our draft is more, will be more easily to understand by the IETF traditions. So this is the main changes. And we also made the whole editorial change, the entire draft, to be better aligned with MEF project and readability. And besides all this, we also highlight this SD1 application-based policy service, since SD1 it's quite different with the traditional L2 VPN and L3 VPN. It has application-based multipass selection feature. So there's a lot of policy related with this multipass selection policy. So this is the main changes. And we also add a section to elaborate what's the difference with the OSE draft. It's proposed in RTGWG. So that's the overall changes. And for the OSE model difference, here is the major difference. The major difference is our SD1 service model, which is a quite high level interface to the customer. It's upon the user's request, service will do some infrastructure service like sites, connection, and also application policy. This is it's a very high level one. For this model, it will not be aware any like real underlay resources here. But for OSE model, the assumption is quite different. They feel that SD1 infrastructure service is just within their vendor domain, SD1 manager's scope. So they don't want to touch anything about the site VPN part. They just want to do the OSE gateway service between the two domains. So right now they have the OSE gateway service model, and they also have a PaaS service, very similar with SD1, our model with application policy, but they just touch the application SLA-based policy. That's because across domains, interdomains, they need to make the different domains have the consistent policy. In that way, the SLA can be guaranteed across the domains. So this is a major difference with the OSE draft. So now I think
my question is, do both of you agree with the difference? The two model, do you agree with the difference?
Yes, I'm part of the other draft author. So this draft has two components, so it can easily be understandable.
Okay, thank you.
And for right now, I think the draft open issue may be the first. We'll think whether, because right now Charles is already the co-author of this draft, so we like to hear whether the working group think this is enough for the MEF working project alignment. So we like to hear whether because in that way we can update the draft. So Charles can propose the changes to the MEF community to ask the comment. So I think in this way we can make a better alignment with the two standardization.
Yeah, Charles Eckel. So, I have been working within MEF. They're aware of this work that's going on. The one thing that makes it a little bit tricky is, MEF is more of a closed membership-based organization, right? So a lot of things that happen in MEF are by default private to the members, and you can make effort to share things like not just via liaison, but there's other mechanisms too. So, but so doing the work within IETF and then coordinating back to MEF just makes things easier because in IETF everything's open kind of by default. So in terms of liaison though, or working with MEF, are we comfortable with just sort of this informal? I'm working in both. I think there's other people who would be working on in both communities, or do we need something more formal? That's kind of the question here.
Ignas Bogdanas, and it's actually a question, Charles, to you. Draft wood is coming from ONUG side. How much of the coordination is happening between ONUG and MEF on the requirement side?
So I'd say that's evolving. I'm not active in ONUG, but my understanding of the history is that MEF and ONUG have not been able to work together very well. Them both coming into IETF with drafts has kind of helped force some inner working. It's not a done deal, but one of the things that looks quite likely now is that both will be worked on within MEF, because if you look at the overall MEF architecture, there's a lot of, the first draft that we're doing now is from a subscriber to a service provider, but there's also within MEF service provider to service provider interfaces, which is very similar to what a vendor to another vendor would look like, which is what the OSE draft is doing. So MEF just hasn't gotten to that yet. It's not that they don't plan on doing that. So it would fit very nicely into the overall MEF architecture. And I think MEF and ONUG seem to be, they're still discussing, but it seems more promising that they will work together on that, and perhaps by both being in that. To be determined, but yeah.
So I think for the OSE SD1 draft, I think in later on in the future, we should align the terminology of the two drafts. I will relate the working group's comments to Steve, because he's not here at this time at IETF. So, and I also propose using like grouping statement on the component, model component, to allow reuse, like the site VPN application policy grouping. So in that way, maybe these two drafts will not have too much overlap with the modeling. So I like to hear the working groups and
thoughts on this. Before, or if anyone is going to come to the mic, a question, maybe you know, maybe you don't. What is the routing working group's thoughts on this, on their draft? Is that going to be progressing forward? What is their intent with that work?
I think from the medalist, Kieran asked this question to Steve, but Steve think because they think they rely on the routing areas expertise on the like interdomain, like different options configuration. So he prefers to RTGWG, but I don't tell him further about what's our SD1 model is, if it's will be doing work here. So I like to hear, maybe we can a presentation, doing some presentation or getting comments from both working group and to work together.
Yeah, I would like to personally see, as a chair, more of the discussion. Where does it make most sense for this work to happen?
Yeah.
Where do we have the expertise? Because it sounds like the coordination with the other SDOs is useful,
Yes.
Especially bringing parties together here at the IETF. But where do we have the most likely chance of making this work successful?
Yeah, okay.
请问方华为 actually, for OSE young model draft, actually work is progressing. Right now, we didn't do too much update besides the terminology alignment. So, from also point of view, we don't have a strong opinion for this draft. Where which working will be the right place to do this? We leave this to the chair to decide this. Yeah.
Ignas Bogdanas. SD-WAN itself is not a technology component. It's a mix of separate technologies bundled into something like a product. And IETF doesn't work on that. IETF works on specific subcomponents of this based on a guidance coming from ONUC, from MEF, from some other entities in the industry. Therefore, with this, for me personally, it's a question whether we understand the requirements of what needs to go into the modeling here. The other important aspect is that even if we're talking here about a service model, the service model eventually has interfaces to the technology-specific models, and that is where the biggest gaps are at this time. If we're looking into the security side, the situation of modeling there is quite sad. If we're looking into routing side, that situation is quite good. But again, in order to practically be able to use SD-WAN as a service, those components need to combine. Therefore, and I'm just now thinking aloud, the service modeling probably would have more experience if that is done outside of the IETF. ONUC or MEF probably. An IETF here in this case is an owner of Yang as a modeling language and a guidance of how that should be done. The technology-specific components, which are not in scope of those drafts, which are happening, there are some documents elsewhere, probably are within the scope of IETF and not in Opsawg, but in the say, specific working groups focusing on the technology. Routing, tunneling, IPsec, and things like that.
Yeah.
And this question is raised from a practicality perspective. Yes, SD-WAN is fashionable buzzword these days, and therefore it attracts attention in IETF. The question is whether IETF has sufficient word to say for the community of the users. That let's look realistically. SD-WAN is not being standardized in IETF, and another thing, SD-WAN is not something to standardize. This is a collection of technology components, and that work is done outside of IETF.
I think this is a requirement from MEF, and MEF has already defined the service, and we just IETF we just help MEF to design the young data model.
And that is perfectly fine if this is done in a context that IETF is the source of guidance on how to design the thing. If we are certain that we have enough of the requirements and that model will eventually match of what they expect and will be usable, yes, fine, let's do that. Otherwise, if this is a situation that IETF is trying to tell the operations community on how this should be done and operated, probably it's not the right way of doing it.
So I think the answer is we are not going to describe the requirement or define the requirement in IETF. We just use the requirement from MEF, right? So.
Charles Eckel. MEF 70, the doc that's already referenced here, that is the requirements for SD-WAN. Now, that's MEF has decided that they've made it publicly known that they're doing a phased approach. There's already a phase 2, which is going to add more capabilities, kind of more details into the requirements and the specification of the service. There's almost certainly going to be a phase 3. Rather than wait and try to get everything, MEF wanted to bring this to market and make it public as soon as possible. So they've decided to take a phased approach. So these requirements are going to continue to expand, I guess. So what our current approach was, let's just reference these publicly available specifications and make it an IETF draft. Otherwise, we could do the Yang modeling work within MEF, but then we would just really rely on IETF expertise to not only review and comment on it, but help us maintain alignment so that people that try to use the MEF service models and tie it to the technology and the underlays that are actually used, that could be a straightforward type of thing. So MEF would need help with that, because what I've seen with MEF models in the past is they kind of sit out on their own, and it's hard to figure out how to make use of any IETF models in combination with them.
Yeah, I see this is a good cooperation between MEF and the IETF. So what's your opinion?
That needs to happen, but how best to do that, whether to do the Yang models here or in MEF, I honestly don't know. I just want to try to get the two groups to cooperate more. And the one thing that makes me think IETF is better is that working on these things in the open in IETF, again, is the default. Whereas in MEF, I've been trying to make MEF more open and put out early versions of things, and it's possible to do that. It's a little bit more painful, and there will be some lag between when the working group within MEF, they'll kind of bless periodic versions of the document to share publicly.
Yes, I understand. I just try to address Igna's question.
Ignas Bogdanas. And well, this is one of the worrying aspects from my side. Charles, you say periodically. Does this mean that this set of drafts right now focuses on phase 1 and nothing more? And once they have if they are working on the requirements for phase 2, that will be a separate model and not just iterative and endless work on this model here?
So as I mentioned, there is already a phase 2 document. It's going to be MEF 70.1. It's already started, and there'll almost certainly be a MEF 70.2. That's just the way MEF, rather than do biz versions, that's the way MEF does it. Only this time they intentionally said, specify just, like an MVP type of thing for SD-WAN. That's MEF 70, knowing up front that they would immediately start a MEF 70.1. And that's the way they're working on this. So it'll continue to add additional SD-WAN related, service functionality into it. Not only that, but to start to work on other interfaces. This is just one interface, as I mentioned. This is the interface between a customer and a subscriber, right? There are going to be, a customer and a service provider. There will be interfaces for service provider to service provider, and then also north-south interfaces within a service provider, where hopefully we'll be able to leverage a lot of IETF existing Yang models.
So basically, ship phase 1, and then look at other things.
Yep.
This is Qingwu from Huawei. Just add something here. Actually, I think the collaboration between MEF and IETF should be encouraged. We already, do this. Actually, besides Charles getting involved, and we also have our colleague Nina Dunba actually get engaged in this SD-WAN activity in MEF. We have to coordinate between MEF and IETF, and my colleague Nick will also, keep track of this MEF progress to make sure online. So I think we also hear there's some requests from MEF. They really want to see how to map, service level definition into the online technology. So they look into southbound interface of orchestrator. So they try to, want to get help from the IETF. So that's why we think this is something we should, keep on to collaborate with MEF. Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to have to take. I think we should keep have this discussion and ask the pointed question on the list because we are running out of time as to what is this work interesting here, and I'll take an action to start that discussion on the list so we can capture some more of these comments.
Okay, so
Okay. Is there is there any interest in this room then of taking up this work, of continuing this work for this model in Opsawg? A few hands. Well, more hands keep going. I guess maybe if I wait long enough. Okay. Do people think this document is ready for adoption then by the working group in its current state? Less hands, but not zero. I think we'll take it to the list and see what the list thinks. We definitely want to hear more comments, but we're going to have to move on. Thank you, Bill. Okay. Well, thank you. I've just been notified that we have a little bit more time from Warren. Our next presentation will be remote, so I will ask Oscar, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me properly?
We can hear you perfectly. Can you hear us?
Yes, I've been hearing you all the time. So yesterday I had also a good experience with routine working group. So it seems this remote presentation works good. And even I can see the guys in the room now.
Okay. Can you, yesterday one couldn't interrupt a remote presentation. So hopefully it sounds like we can talk back and forth. Great. So all you.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a presentation today of the Layer 3 VPN network model that we submitted the first version in May, and recently we submitted a second version. It is an initiative by a bunch of operators who we were trying to implement the automation of Layer 3 VPNs, and we took as a starting point the Layer 3 SM, and we found some things to implement it, so this is why we were pushing for this network model. So next slide, please. So we're going to see why do we need a new network model, what have we found missing so far in the L3SM, which are the approaches that we can follow to do this work. Some modifications, I think I'm not going to enter into the modifications really in detail. You have the draft and the document and the young model to go through them if needed, and just focus on the open issues and get more feedback from the community. So next slide, please. Yeah, so first of all, why do we need a new model? Okay, so there is currently a VPN service model, the L3SM, and it's a very good model, and we do think that it is a good model to be used in the communication between the customer and the network operator. So we believe that for that kind of communication, it's ideal. Okay. However, as it is always seen from the customer point of view, it does not enter, and it should not enter into some parameterization of the network resources. Also does not enter into, for example, identifying really the PE or the real port that we are using in the operator's network. So this is why when implementing it to be used towards our automation tools, call it, some people call it SDN controller, some people call it network orchestration. There are several ways of using it. In yesterday's presentation in Routing Working Group, we explained the different architectural options or how the model fit in the different architectural options, but basically this is this model would be the piece between the service orchestration and the network orchestration part. Okay, so it's once you have received the request from the customer, and then you are able to select which are the real endpoints from where the service is gonna be used, and you need to define the resources. Then model is used for that part. Okay, and this is where we are implementing it in Telefónica, and also other operators plan to implement it in that part. Okay, so please, next slide, please. So for, here I'm going to just describe very briefly some scenarios where there were some gaps with L3SM. So for example, one of them is the specific PE identification points. Also details about the beaters. We think that the keys are the beaters that are the physical connections to the PEs. So specify which is the encapsulation. So in our use cases, we have a wide variety of L3 VPNs starting with different kinds of encapsulations. So we also need to be able to inform about which are the list of available beaters per site. So for us, even for both for inventory and for management purposes, it is needed. Also, we have found use cases in our network where the far end is remote, so we need a pseudo wire stitching to the L3 VPN. Also, we need to cover use cases with multiple domains. So that is, we need to split the layer 3 VPN into several domains. So we need to orchestrate these resources in different domains. And also related to this multi-domain, be able to configure what we call the VPN nodes, which would be like an abstraction of the BRF. So just take into account that here we are not entering into device configuration. Okay, we are describing here the service as a whole in the network. Okay, and also we found that there are room for some more routing protocols between C and T. Okay, so please next slide. So I just want to discuss one of which is the approach that we can do. So we had our original approach in the 0.0 version was, okay, go for the augment approach. Okay, let's take the L3SM and extend it to with what we found missing. Okay, but then we realized that there are a lot of things from the service model, the customer service model, that we no longer needed. They were used in the service orchestration phase to make down some decisions, and then, okay, once those decisions are made, we don't need them. So then is why we think that there is a better, and when we requested for feedback in the mailing list, people said, okay, the prune and extend approach might be better. So it's okay, start with L3SM, remove what is not needed, keep everything related to the service that we need to maintain it, to put down, and then augment whatever is needed. We know that this might take a long time. This might take more discussions in IETF. Don't forget that L3SM was even a working group itself, so we know it might take us some time. But I think as the kind of augmentations and won't be, hopefully not too much, I think we can. This is a valid approach, and just in the pruning process, we need to define what do we need to keep. Yesterday there was some suggestion of keeping some information just as optional, not mandatory to push it down. Okay, so next slide, please. So with the prune and extend approach, we have tried to preserve as much as possible the L3SM structure. So within the L3NM, we will have the VPN service and the site with the list of beaters, and the VPN inside the VPN service, and add some profiles associated to these VPN nodes. So not going to enter into much more details for that. We can discuss it on the list. Okay, so please, next slide. So how does it map to the network deployment? So basically, what we have in our network is a collection of PEs, and in that collection of PEs is where we will say, okay, we will associate VPN nodes two PEs, and the bearers will be the physical ports that connect to the PEs, and these bearers can have several connections over them, and these connections to the site, to the customers, are the site network accesses. So this is how it relates. So of course, this is a simple slide, but it can make more complex scenarios where the connection between the real customer side and the PE goes through a set of switches, and where you do some different levels of encapsulations, or as we mentioned earlier, it's a pseudo wire to that part connection. But basically, this is the main concepts. Okay, so just we keep the site as a logical structure. Say, okay, this is some remote location will be connected here. The bearer is the key. Have the and we can associate multiple VPNs. Okay, so next slide, please. So I won't get into the detail. This is just the structure of the model, and we added is in the orangish color is what we added to the model. So that I'm not going to enter into detail. I prefer receiving feedback from you. So next slide, please. Also here, these are some extensions that we did here. So for example, for the VPN service, we added some profiles, which are the important profiles, the ones that will be associated to BRF. So this is where we can put really the resources. So for example, the RTs. So for example, we have observed in many services in Telefonica that the same RT is used in all the locations. So then we can put it here in this profile and associate it to a VPN node. So then we do this allocation on the OSS level, and we pass it to the model, and then this is then further taken down to that device model. Also, for example, in the site, what we have for the site is the bearers. So this is the list of bearers that are associated to that site. Okay, so for example, for some customer, okay, you are using this specific bearer. And in the site network access, you have the pointer to that bearer. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, please. Just I'm gonna go very quickly. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we keep in GitHub we keep a list of the open issues that people have identified in the mailing list. So we will have taken is everything that was on the mailing list, take it, open it as an issue in GitHub just to be able to track it. And now we have already solved two of these three issues. And we still have some open points. So for example, how to link the network service YAML model with other modules. For example, the topology. I am assuming that the network orchestration or network controller can expose a topology, and this topology contains the PE. So maybe it's easier that we can just do a leaf ref from the network service model to those nodes in the topology. For traffic engineering, there is already an initiative in TIAS to map the service to the set of tunnels that might compose it. So I think if we go for this approach, we need to link with that work. And also the composed VPNs, which goes for more complex multi-operator VPN scenarios. So far we have received good feedback on the mailing list from operators and people that potentially can implement it. We have a set of vendors that are have their implementations of this model, so we can take it to the network. So we think that this is a topic that it is in scope of the IETF, and we'd like to continue working on it, and we plan to post a new version just soon, just fixing some bugs, and keep collecting more. And we'd like to hear also from you how to move forward this work, and if it's interesting for the community. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Oscar. Comments quickly on this, the L3 network model.
Hi, Oscar. This is Benoit Claes. So thanks for this work. It's always great whenever we have operators coming and providing feedback on the service models. And yes, sometimes there are iterations on service models. So my only open question is, so those were also operators who came and creating the service model, the first one, and they were also from Orange and KDI and Verizon. Did you get their feedback on what you're proposing here?
Yes, and when I got the feedback, is what that their intention was aimed at creating the service for the customer, of the from the customer point of view. So I think their focus was not exactly the same as the model. So it was like in a higher level. So I think the uses of these models are at different steps in the chain within an operator.
Thank you, Oscar.
So I have a question for the room. Do people feel that this work is valuable to do here in Opsawg? Substantial number of hands went up. Okay, I think, Oscar, you gave yourself an action item to update. You're going to update this draft with some of the open issues. I was looking at your GitHub. You've got a few of them there. I think do that, and then we can decide to progress this forward. It sounds like there's enough interest in the working group here, and we'll double check on the list to keep this work moving forward in Opsawg.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Oscar. And for my first remote presentation, that went surprisingly well. So clearly the next three are going to be disasters.
Yes, but I hope that next time I'll be in Singapore so I can make it on site.
As do we. Okay, Chinwoo, you're up.
Good morning, everyone. This is Qingwu. I'm here to discuss the framework for ultimate service and network management with Yang. Actually, this topic, we set up the side meeting to discuss this, so we will bring some feedback. So this is also a list. We actually work together with many operators on this work. So go back to the goal and motivation. We think right now IETF develop a huge amount of Yang data model, how this model can put it together, integrate together in the same namespace. So this is something hasn't been documented anywhere. And so the goal of this draft actually try to, come up with this Yang model architecture for service management and network management. And what we really like to do is come up with this common functionality and a framework to help to build this fully Yang-based system. And in addition, we want to provide a guideline on how to, to put the Yang model at a different layer together to deliver a service and also for this kind of service enforcement. But we cannot avoid the ocean. So really, this work actually, focuses on the Yang data model integration at a different layer or in the same layer. So some of work actually we already have some many discussion, or we get feedback from some operator. We think we want to not put everything in this draft. So first step actually whether we should list all the Yang model defined in IETF in this draft. Actually that's not our intention, because it's very challenging to enumerate all these Yang data model. Also, maybe we have other Yang model developed in other SDO, how to, put all these together. So it's not reasonable. So we don't cover the first piece. The second is do we need to provide inventory of the tools or mechanism? Actually, one example is we have many OM tools or mechanism, and but we think this is not the focus of this work. This work just focus on young data model integration. I think tool chain is very important, but we can leave this out and to more focus on the young data model integration. Also, in the scientific meeting, we really want to address is gap between IETF young model and operator operator requirements actually. But we think put this kind of gap adoption in this draft that's also not reasonable. So we leave this out. And another comments actually from operator, they talk with us whether we can provide young data model registration. We think already IETF have young catalog effort. They actually can help operator to figure out how to select the model when they deploy the service. So young catalog can be a good tools to address these kind of issues. So we leave this out. Also, because young data model, many SDO do this. So integration model in across the SDO, actually, this is something very useful, I think, but we don't want to cover this. So status update, actually, we present this draft in the last IETF meeting in both ops area and the routing area, and solicited feedback from the operator and the implementer. And we actually, based on the OPSWG managed discussion, actually some comments raised by the Joe and some other vendors, and we try to address some of the issue actually. So we make actually 2 revision in the previous revision. There were 4 actually. We tried to address Joe's comments and other vendors' comments, and to try to clarify the module composition and a young catalog. And also we actually work, we reach out to the operator team, actually get a lot of feedback. All of them actually, many of them actually integrate, interested in how to integrate a young data model in the same namespace. So we added several new cursor actually from operator actually. And we also, clarify the scope, try to make it more focused. Yeah, that's the change we made. And a quick update for the side meeting. Actually, this side meeting actually organized on Tuesday morning, and we invited many operators. Also, we socialize this side meeting through the mailing list, and we make it public on the side meeting wiki page, make it more official. So the goal is try to discuss the gap between the IETF model and industry needs, and see what is the right venue to discuss or address this gap. So this draft actually try to cover some of the pieces, try to address this gap, how to do the young data model integration. And so we, work with China Mobile and also Telefonica. And for this, we present the young data model framework, and also China Mobile present the problem space and the current status of young data model, and Telefonica present their use case and the requirements. So we get a lot of discussion, and so here we listed the meeting material and minutes. You can take a look at that. So the outcome, actually, we feel actually, people agree that there's a gap. Actually, this gap need to be addressed. So there's many ways to address this. So we will actually approach AD to talk about that. Actually, we have many proposals. I think we may create the mailing list to solicit feedback from the operator community, also from the implementer or developer. Also, for this kind of young data model integration framework is very useful tools, and also we should actually to figure out how to reach out to the operator community with many ways. So, so one question from the author design team, actually, we think, we try to address some of this gap. Actually, we think this kind of data model integration framework will be a good, starting point to figure out how to address this. And so we want to ask a working group whether it is a right working group to talk about this, whether it's useful to publish such kind of document. That's all.
Thanks, Chen. Comments on this draft? So, personally, more as I guess a contributor, I saw your out of scope. When I read through it, there's still you list a lot of the IETF Yang modules, how they fit together, what the capabilities currently are. I'm not sure how that structure currently gets to some of the questions and the gaps. So for me, it's how do we engage more operators? And Benoit came up and made the comment. It's great when we see operators putting forth what they want to see, but how is this work going to fill or help to bridge some of those gaps?
Yeah, I think there's many discussing on this issue for we list many young data model at a different level. So we try to address this. We think it will be useful use IETF model as an example to see how this model can put together. Actually, some people may suggest move to the appendix, but we still think maybe there's some, we can, make it more generic. Doesn't need to, tie it to specific IETF defined model. This is something we can clean up actually, but we really want to target to the generic architecture to come up with this common functionality framework. Yeah.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I've not read the draft, or I've only read bits of it, so I can't give detailed comments. But I think having a general architecture describing how services provisioned and use Yang models and the layering and that sort of thing, I think that's generally useful. I think at an abstract level, that sort of information is handy and explaining the life cycle and stuff. And I think that's the heart of what Dan Bogdanovich's talk in RTG-WG was also getting to yesterday. Whether there should be any specifics about particular models and how they interact written into a draft, that I'm not so sure about, because I think that stuff probably needs to evolve quite quickly. And by the time it goes through the specification process, it's not so useful. I think that almost that needs to be on GitHub somewhere or something. That's the place where I think the sort of running code side of this, which is what I regard the relationship between those models, is probably more useful. Maybe so. There's not a comment on this draft, but I would see trying to describe the abstract architecture as being the key piece for me.
Thank you.
Liang from China Mobile. I think there are more coordination work than technical work for these thoughts of young model status. And I think it's quite useful to have a framework as a guideline if that can help operators understand more what model has been developed, what working group in such a status, so that the operator can give more feedback to the community how and what we could do to actually coordinate all this model to have a more end-to-end service type of methodology. So I would have thought the framework would be helpful in terms of coordinate all these young models work happening in IETF.
So Rob Wilton, Cisco, yeah, I definitely agree with that previous comment about this being a coordination problem as well.
Yeah, just one information we want to share. Actually, we also, receive a lot of positive feedback from many operators in this IETF meeting. Many people may really don't read this draft, but they join the study meeting and they give a lot of good feedback. They think this kind of framework is needed to help them to deploy the service. So, I think it will be useful to have this. Yeah,
I think what at least I've heard here, it might be useful to divorce some of the specific Yang modules and maybe talk to Dian and see what might be done at a higher level framework to do some of the things Rob was mentioning about connect the dots and how one uses Yang modules together.
Yeah.
More. Frank.
One more thing, Frank Rockners. Before you jump to the framework, maybe it's useful to reverse the logic. I just scanned through the document, and For certain services, you seem to be doing that mapping exercise that goes across all these various layers. And then at the same time, in your presentation set, you were saying that some of these things should be out of scope. So right now, the document is a little bit of a mixed bag of things between specifics that are not really done to the very level of granularity that you would need in order to get that actionable and implementable. And at the same time, you have this generic framework that you use or that you want to go and derive from these specific models. What I believe would be useful is to break this thing up and maybe initially focus on 1, 2, 3 initial use cases where you really do the mapping exercise and really nail it to the detail. And once you have that learning experience, then you can go and up-level that into something that is more generic. If we're trying to do both things at the very same time, it might be that we're doing disservice to the generic framework as to the thing that you don't really spell out to the level of detail where it becomes actionable and implementable. Because the devil with this mapping exercise is in the detail. There's multiple layers of indirection, and you can get it wrong at every single layer of indirection, and then most of these layers of indirection are non-deterministic from an implementation perspective necessarily, right? So what do you choose? Which particular counters do you refer to? So I'd rather see the nitty-gritty spelled out, maybe in a different document, than, well, you're trying to go and lump everything into one big bag.
Ignas Bogdanas. Framework is good and is needed, but you cannot deploy the framework. You also need a set of validated modules that actually work together and do something of value to the operations. Framework is a guidance, but that guidance should also drive the work of actually validating the things together. So I think that's similar to what Frank was explaining, probably from a slightly different angle. So both of those works are needed, and what you're doing here is in the right direction, but this is not something that can be taken and used.
Okay, we can keep polish this document, try to make it more generic. Yeah.
Thanks, Jin. Next up, we have a lot of mud in your eye. Elliot, and then we'll have Dan after that on various mud topics.
Good morning. All right, so let's see here. The first thing we'll talk about is the mud controller selection, and then we'll get into mud reporting. All right, so just by way of review, when a device wants to be protected by manufacturer usage descriptions, it publishes a mud URL. The mud manager picks up a mud file, and that mud file contains a bunch of access control statements. And those access control statements can say things like, allow me to connect to a controller or my controller. Now, it could also say things like, let me go to this domain, let me talk to the same manufacturer. Most of the other abstractions or classes, they can be filled in automatically by the mud manager. But the controller class and my controller class requires, at least at the moment, some system administrator or network administrator input. Well, the network administrator might want some help in answering the question, who should be the controller for this particular device? There are two different classes. There's my controller and there's controller. My controller is does not require any class naming on the part of the manufacturer. It just says for this given mud URL, my controller I should have access to my controller, and the administrator can fill in that. For controller, they name a class. And the benefit of naming a class is you can use that across many different device types. So now the question then is, how do we provide a hint to the administrator as to what those controllers should be? So that's what this draft starts to flesh out. This is for the controller. This is a controller-driven approach. That is to say, the controllers declare I can be a controller for a particular type of device. The controllers themselves are assumed to have MUD files in this context. And that means, by the way, at least at the moment, that they're assumed to have a single purpose. They can use an extension to declare this, which basically names the classes that they can control. And it's up to the admin to decide whether or not they like the idea of this controller having access for this purpose. So that's pretty much the draft in a nutshell. And so this is how it works. This guy says, I can control class brand.example.com/homeowner. And these guys all say, forgive me for stepping outside the line for a moment, they all put in their things, essentially a permit statement that says, let me access this thing. So you have a nice rendezvous. And so this is something that we wanted to get around to in the initial version. It was probably just a bit much for the initial version of MUD. This is just a nice extension that ties a nice bow around the automation process here. Now, there are a couple of open questions. Okay, the first one is that the controller itself, as I mentioned, has to have a MUD file and MUD URL, meaning that the controller itself is not an application. This is something we'd like to fix, but at least on the MUD list, and I think this even got to the Ops area working group list, this is still a pretty hard problem. And the second point is that manufacturers may want to advertise which devices can fill in these classes from their side. So if I go back to this picture here, rather than having this guy say, I can control these guys and I can be in this class, the other way to do this is to say, these guys can say, here are a list of controllers that can control me. Now, I can't say quite yet which one's the better approach to do this. I think we need a little implementation experience. We need to talk to some manufacturers. It could be that both are the right approach. One area I want to explore is whether we can get the model right such that it can be used in either case. However, I think that's going to be a little difficult. But I think what I'd suggest is people read the draft. I don't think it's ready for working group adoption just yet. But I'm going to implement this in the next couple of months. It's a pretty easy implementation when you do it from the controller side. It's really easy. I think Ranga there could probably do it in 20 minutes with his headphones on. To give you an idea, I mean, I think it's very easy to implement. But the only issue is you have to have some UI elements in there as well to say, yes, these are the things, and sort of a drop down. Here are the guys who are able to be controllers for this device. And in some cases, if you're the only controller, you might just want to fill it in and say, I see this guy, is it okay when you do the initial approval? All right, so is there interest in this work? Anybody?
People read this draft? Interest?
I see a couple of hands.
Yep, a few hands have gone up.
All right, so yeah, for the rest of you, read the draft. It's fun. I like doing fun stuff. All right, questions before I go on?
Yeah, Tim Karinoki, I do have a question, just respect to in general with MUD, right? So when I look at the RFC was, really oriented towards, the URL and, how you get that stuff, right? And it made secondary comments on a controller. It gave a definition, but now I'm seeing more and more specifications about, now I've got a reporting aspect, a controller, whatever, right? And so I'm wondering if MUD is turning from a URL, in simple words, right, to a system, right, where you have these controllers and stuff. And so my concern is that we've got some systemic or system aspects of this that, or framework, I don't care, but how all this kind of works together. A controller works with an agent. We had the same thing in some other places that I was actually looking at this work to see if it made sense to extend the other work that had controllers and agents for IoT and other management of devices and to utilize the MUD and incorporate it. But I didn't have the framework elements that I could really understand. I could infer them, but I didn't see them. And so I was just wondering if we're going to move this from a URL to more systemic elements. Is there something that we need to produce for the industry to understand what all the components of MUD is and how they interact?
All right, thank you for the question. I'm going to respond briefly for time's sake. If you look at the history actually of the RFC, if you go back into the tracker, there was a framework document and we collapsed everything into that MUD RFC. The MUD consists of what I would say are 3 components, really: the URL, the description file, and its interpretation at the MUD manager level. What I would suggest is we have an offline conversation, though, about whether additional guidance is needed for industry. I'm always happy, believe me, I blather on. I'm always happy to provide whatever guidance we think industry needs in order to implement this. And from a systemic view, I was hoping that we have a reasonably systemic view in that document. If you're saying that we're missing, then I'd like to correct.
Yeah, it's just that as it seems like we're extending things, it's just trying to understand what the responsibilities of the various components are, right? You know, I think that was kind of missing, other than some short descriptions in the initial RFC.
All right, let me come back to that because I have a question later on in the discussion.
Qing from Huawei.
Hi.
I think I second the team's opinion. Actually, I don't see the whole picture of how this IoT device, what is the life cycle, the whole IoT device management. We may need some framework to see how it works, how MAD fit into this framework. It's not very clear to me, but I think very useful to have this kind of progress.
I encourage your draft. That is to say, please write one. Okay. So the next thing is a little different. This is work that Ranga from NIST and I are working on. And this was in response to some industry interest. They said, well, okay, great, I have my MUD file. I have my MUD URL output. How do I know that the device is being treated appropriately within a given network? Now, the title of this says reporting on fails. It could also be reporting on successes. I just want to highlight that. I tend to be a bit of a pathologist, so I always look at the fails in my head. So the problem statement is here is exactly what you see there, which is what happened, at least in my mind, what happened if the device isn't getting the access that it needs, even though it's putting out the MUD URL and the MUD manager is interpreting it. All right, now, so we have an initial version of a draft, which is draft leader ops area group MUD reporter. So imagine, roughly speaking, what's reported is think of ARF. So you got Murray in the back of the room there, all the way in the back actually, who did this thing called ARF, which is a reporting mechanism on how DMARC is being used, for instance, to reject or quarantine email. Well, the same sort of concept applies with MUD. You've deployed this MUD URL, you've deployed this device. Now what happens? Is it acting? Is it being used appropriately? Is the device getting the access it needs? And within a deployment, if you have multiple devices, are some of them getting the access they need? Are some of them not getting the access they need? And what information does the manufacturer need in order to determine a couple of questions? What are those questions? Okay. Number one is is the MUD file wrong? Like maybe they've underspecified permissions in the MUD file, and so all of a sudden you're seeing these rejections. Is the device hacked? Maybe the MUD file is right. The network management system is operating exactly as it should be operating, but the device has been hacked and is trying to go in different directions. Which, by the way, is one of the design goals of MUD, is to actually spot that. Is there a problem with the MUD manager where it's not filling out the abstractions correctly? Is it a problem with, say, domain lookups? If you're saying, please permit access to domain such and such, is the resolution occurring differently between the device and the policy enforcement point such that the device is being blocked even though the domain maps to a particular, to that IP address? So these are some of the problems that you could crop up in a MUD implementation. Our model needs to support a little bit of this. Now, this is an initial draft. To give you an idea how initial, just in the span of 4 days, Ranga went and implemented about 80% of it. Actually, he went and implemented about 80% of it in 2 days. And in those 2 days, probably the draft has changed about 20% in terms of the model. So maybe even a little bit more. So it's really, really actively being developed. But it also leads to a couple of questions, right? And the biggest issue I want to highlight is that there are privacy concerns here. So the MUD manager starts reporting this stuff. Let's say it's reporting it to the manufacturer. All of a sudden, what information is the manufacturer getting that that they otherwise wouldn't get? And can we establish an appropriate permissions model such that this reporting model is actually useful? So this is the part where I say, Warren, pay attention. Right, because you're very focused on privacy issues, so this is where we need a lot of guidance. We might want to bring this draft to PERG, for instance, for some advice as to how we can have an appropriate permissions model that succeeds. The manufacturer might learn some operational state in the locale. The locale might be linkable. There may be devices where you definitely don't want to do this for, where you might not want to leak the location of what you're doing, for instance. So we need to think a little bit about this. And some of this information leaks naturally with MUD already just by retrieving a MUD URL. So it may be that there's less of a concern here than I'm thinking about, but I think we need some eyes on that. And so my first question is there interest in this diagnostic reporting tool?
Question of interest. There are a few hands go up. Actually, a number of hands go up. How many people have read this draft?
See a few
fewer hands, but a few.
Okay, so look, we have some nice heated debates at the IETF. I'm pretty sure we can have a couple on this one. I think it's really interesting work, but it needs a lot of eyes to get it just right. I don't want to I don't want to speed through this draft, but I suggest that the best way for this draft to be the best it can be is for two things to happen. Number one, we need manufacturers to look at it to make sure they're going to get what they want out of it. Number two is that the IETF, this will require substantial cross-area review in order to really be the right thing that comes out. Finally, one last point, which is whatever the manufacturers want to see, the deployment will want to see more. That is to say, is my own deployment working appropriately? And so we probably want the draft to accommodate that use case as well. And in that context, one of the questions we will have, and there are privacy issues related to this as well, is who is the MUD manager? In the enterprise, this is an easy case. It's going to be something adjunct to AAA infrastructure, for an example. But in the home, it's a different kettle of fish. Is the MUD manager going to be Google? Is it going to be Amazon? Is it going to be TELUS? Is it going to be Cablecom, Cable Labs? So there may be privacy considerations even in the deployment. So I really do think we need a lot of eyes. And with that, I would just like to say, are there any questions about this work or comments?
No one's coming up. Please do read this. I think Chin's going to make a comment.
Not related to this question. This is Chin again. So can you give an update of the IoT MUD side meeting? I didn't see that.
The IoT MUD side meeting, I don't know that I have time.
Yeah, we're running short on time. So if you want to send a summary out to Ops area working group list, that would be great.
Yeah, we had a good meeting. I'm happy to talk to you as well. Take care.
Thanks. Next up, we have more MUD. Dan Wing will be presenting remotely. Dan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. You hear me over there?
Yep, you sound great.
Awesome.
So go ahead.
Yeah, so let's get started, please. So our goal, next slide, our goal for this document is to extend MUD from what it's doing today to describe TLS interactions, so mostly the TLS handshake. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing is to extend it to look at the handshake. So the Cipher Suite's offered, the Cipher Suite accepted, the SNI that is in the client hello, the server name and the certificate that are in the server hello. And what the reason is, research has found, and there's citations below, that there are mismatches between what happens with malware and what happens with what we'll call legitimate software, especially running on things. The things can be profiled, and a MUD profile can be published, indicating what TLS parameters are normal for that device to operate with, therefore helping to identify if that device has malware running on it. The characteristics that we found in that research is malware does not use the same crypto suites, does not connect to the same servers, behaves differently than the legitimate software running on the device. So that's that use case on the left on this slide. And on the right, we've also found situations where we can use the same technique to detect what I'm going to call broken TLS. So failures of best practices, such as validating the server certificate, expiration date, things like that, which have been found in the wild. And we have citations on the next slide on that. And reuse of the same private key with mutually authenticated TLS as we've seen in the wild. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of reasons that the software uses, the legitimate software running on the IoT device uses the same crypto suites all the time and the same parameters, and it's the same reasons that browsers do. It's to make code easier to run, and because they are and use less footprint, and because they are constrained devices, they don't have all the memory that a PC does. So they need to use fewer crypto suites and have a constrained set of operations that they're using for their TLS communications. And we've profiled a bunch of devices that were easy to obtain and cheap, and everyone is familiar with Echo, Kindle, a bunch of Google devices, and seeing how many different TLS profiles that they generate following the Yang model that we've proposed. Next slide. And this is a bunch of the Yang that we're proposing to examine and be part of the specification. Next slide. And a common question, of course, is TLS 1.3 encrypts a lot of what's in the handshake, so how valuable is this overall? And while it's true it does encrypt the handshake, what is most valuable for us to get for the profiles that we're interested in is what still remains in the clear with TLS 1.3. And that's all that I have. Next slide, please. And hopefully earned you back some time. And if you have any questions, please come to the mic or drop me an email.
Questions on this work? I think Elliot's coming up.
Hey, Dan. How you doing?
Doing all right, thanks.
All right. So nice draft. Have you tried implementing yet? Do you have some code?
Tiro at McAfee has implemented it, yes.
Okay, very good. Good, because I think one of the things we can do is maybe get a couple of others to join in on the hackathon activities on this too, to see if we can get a couple more implementations. But it sounds like a really great idea. I like the general direction.
Cool, thanks. Unfortunately, neither of us could attend IETF this round.
Benoit Clay. So it's not specific about this draft, but it seems that MUD became something big recently, right? So we went from one RFC in Opsawg, and I was checking the MUD mailing list. Now there is like the hackathon, there is this MUD maker, there is like 7 documents here, right? And that led to the questions that were asked before. How does all this fit together? So, isn't it time to just create a working group or to combine this together? I mean, and I've not been discussing with people about it, but just thinking, to me, whenever I want to get like a picture of everything of MUD, it's like a MUD mailing list, sometime an updated Opsawg. There is the MUD maker. So, just throwing a stone in the pond to make people react.
This thing again, actually, I think there's a research group called Synthesizing IT. How MUD people coordinate with Synthesizing IT? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So occasionally, I presented. Oh, sorry, this is Elliot.
Name.
Okay. Occasionally, I presented to T2TRG. However, this isn't really T2T. This is more T2N, right? The MUD never configures a device. MUD configures the network infrastructure. And it could be addressing more than just access control. I know we have a few concepts there like around this, but it is all focused on configuring the network and never communicating back to the device, and the device should never actually assume that the network is actually doing anything with this information, because there might not be a MUD controller on the network. So it's a little bit of a different thing, but we do talk, absolutely.
And related to Benoit's question, and in the interest of time, I'll discuss this via email more. There's also captive portal discussions that have been happening on Ops area working group list. Maybe it is time to consider is MUD something to centralize more and make more in its own realm versus an Ops AWG, if that work is going to continue to evolve.
This is Elliot again. One question I have about it, and I don't mind if we work in the working group or if we work elsewhere. I think Warren was around for when and Joel was around for a lot of the discussions around where we do all this work, and it's always one where you can split it multiple ways. However, one of the things I would like us to contemplate in the discussion that ensues is, do we just cover MUD? Do we cover some of the onboarding work that is going on related to MUD? Like that, so a lot of stuff's going on in Anima. Some of the stuff is going on in EMU. There's discussion going on in ACME around onboarding. There's stuff that's been going on in 6TiSCH, which looks like it's about to close. There's a whole Anima architecture or it's not Anima is the wrong word. It's the 8366 voucher work that Kent and others did, which is being built upon. And then we need to look at how that works in on-prem. Should we tie these into more of an onboarding working group or an IoT onboarding working group, or should it just be MUD? And I'm getting this really ugly looking face from Warren. So maybe you want to comment.
I think we'll move on, but I do think we should have this broader discussion. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is also remote. How are you? Can you hear us? How are you, Song? Can you hear us? Yes.
Hello? Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
And you are up. If you're talking, we can no longer hear you.
Yeah, I'm talking. Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about this in-situ flow information telemetry framework. We have been talking about this in two meetings ago, and then we also present this in IPPM working group. But we still think the OPS AWG is a right fit for this document, and therefore we are seeking for the working group adoption for this eventually. Please go to the next slide. So the motivation for this document is threefold. Firstly, there are currently some novel data plane telemetry technology are emerging. In specific, there are some, we call that on-pass telemetry. It involves several different technologies, and we think there is a need to actually classify the terms and the underlying techniques so that we can have a formal understanding about those different technologies. And secondly, these techniques are very useful not only for the data center and the enterprise network. We also see a strong interest from the carrier operators to apply this kind of technologies. However, during our prototyping and deployment of this technology, we find there are quite a few challenges we need to address before they can be widely deployed in carrier networks. So we also want to provide an architectural framework to summarize the challenges and give some guideline for the future standard development. So therefore, it's also very important to continue to identify any other open issues. And so it will be very helpful for us to continue to develop the suite of protocols. Next slide. Yeah, so in previous RFCs, we have defined several distinct type of OEM techniques. They are passive and active OEM. The passive means basically you just filter or sample the user traffic and use that to infer the performance of the user traffic. The active is working on the opposite side. Usually you just inject some dedicated OEM package, and you just measure those kind of active probing packets to get the performance of the networks. But this new kind of on-pass data plane telemetry techniques are different from either passive mode or active mode. So we think we can call that a hybrid mode, because instead of just capture the user traffic or inject new packets, it actively modify the user packet by adding metadata or instructions to the user packet, and therefore collects those direct data from the user traffic to infer the performance of each user flows or the network. And below this hybrid mode, they can be further separate to two different type of underlying techniques. We call them one is password mode, another is postcard mode. Right, password mode means it's just basically you stamp the new data to the user packet and to each hop on the forwarding pass. So the representative technologies are the IOM trace mode and the E2E mode both belong to this category. And in contrast, the postcard mode is different. It's instead of adding the user data to the packet itself, it's just directly export data using a separate dedicated OEM packet. And the user traffic will be kept intact, and or it just carry some instruction but notes the data itself. So we think we can in this document we can clarify those different type of technologies. That will be one contribution to complement the already defined terms for the OEM techniques. Next slide. Then this slide summarizes several challenges we already found when we trying to deploy these technologies in carrier networks. The first one is related to the performance. Because this kind of techniques involve quite a lot of data plane processing. It will generate data or generate export packets. So sometimes it can have a direct impact on the forwarding performance. We call that the observant effect, which actually damages the fidelity of the telemetry data, and also it's intolerable to actually impact the forwarding performance. And on the other hand, as export data, due to the huge amount of exported data, the bandwidth consumption is huge. Also, those data may overload the processing servers who will handle this kind of data. So this performance issues must be addressed to allow this kind of techniques to be applied. And also, we find the current standard proposals, there are limited data flexibility and extensibility, which means it can be useful to collect some predefined set of data, but if we consider to apply this in the wider scope to support different network scenarios, or to collect different kind of data, or some even user customized data, this standard proposal still cannot do that. So we need to extend the flexibility and the extensibility. And the last one is deployment issues. Because in carrier networks, there are so many different type of transport protocols. And there are many related work going on in IETF to talk about how you will encapsulate such protocol headers, new headers into the different protocols. So these are very useful, and we need to continue that kind of work to try to cover different kind of network scenarios. And also we need to consider how to handle the different tunnels, how to make this work in both underlay and underlay and overlay networks. So that will be very important to clarify the technique of how to apply in tunnel mode. Next slide, please. Okay, so the high-level framework include 4 key components. The first one is the smart flow data selection, which works at basically at the header node. It allows us to define what kind of packets or what kind of flow we should actually enable this kind of data collection technique. Right, there can be different algorithm-based approaches, or some user-defined smart filters. This kind of techniques are very useful to reduce the load to the network. And the second component is export data reduction, which means when at every node, if it ever need to export data, and we can deploy some event-based smart filters to actually reduce the amount of data that need to be exported. So that's a very effective to reduce data bandwidth, also reduce the load of the processing server. And the third component is covers all the encapsulation and the tunnel mode issues. So make it workable in different underlying networks. So the last one is a dynamic network probe. Is actually a very key component that can be used to support the previous 3 components by allow user to define some data filtering or data selection policies on the runtime. So with these 4 components, we can we can address the performance, deployability, and the flexibility issues we are facing in carrier networks. Next slide. Yeah, so basically we want to take this opportunity to have a more discussion with the working group. We want to collect more feedbacks from the working group. So apart from those have been covered in this document, we want to know, is there any other challenges for the carrier network data plane telemetry we need to address? And also what was missing in this document? Is there any suggestions to make the framework more complete? And we welcome any feedback on this draft, and so we can that can help us to improve this document, and we move it toward the call for the working group adoption. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you. We'll take one question, then we have to take the rest of the list.
Sure. Shweta Sisko. I've gone through this draft a few times. It looks more like a white paper describing a solution, less like a framework. It's a bit confusing on who it is targeted towards and how to use it, including the challenges, requirements that the framework is going to meet. And it has a bunch of references to a whole lot of individual work which are neither RFCs or have been adopted yet. It looks more like the data that is collected here, which is useful, could be given as feedback to the existing drafts that are under work elsewhere, and then revisit and see how do you want to proceed with giving a operator feedback on how to use those in-band telemetry protocols that are going to be defined, and some implementation guidance. But as a framework, it doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, so the technique covered here are quite new. They are all RFC drafts, IETF drafts right now, and so this this document doesn't introduce any new techniques. It's meant to be informational, and also we want to collect actually the feedback from operators for their experience or requirements for the deployment. So. We also want to provide best, industry practice, so that we can help our IETF to continue work on this related techniques. So I think that's the main purpose of this draft.
Documenting deployment experience would be useful, but that's not in there yet. And there is a reference to algorithms that would make it better. There is reference to on-box processing that would make it better without any concrete examples. I think adding those would make it useful. Thanks.
And can please bring that up on the list so we can capture some of that. That was as a contributor, some of my feedback as well. Let's see if we can push that out there. And thank you again for presenting. Our last presenter is remote. Mickey, can you hear us? Mickey, are you there? Mikey, sorry. Mickey. Yep, he's coming to the mic.
Oh, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
All you, the quicker you can go through this, the better.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about IOAM raw data export. So first, for those who are not that aware, IOAM is in situ OAM is being progressed in the IPPM working group, where there's a draft for a data plane format that would go into packets. So essentially, if packets traversing a network in a domain, and maybe at when the packets come into the domain, you start adding at every hop some network telemetry information, and then when you get to the other end, you need to export that in some way out to a processing system that can do analytics or whatever type of monitoring you want. So this kind of complements all that. It's not about how you affect the normal data plane packets, but now that you've collected a bunch of information, how can we export that, and what would we do with that? Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, IOM records operational and telemetry information in its initial form in the packet itself, though there are proposals to export directly from nodes as well. So in raw export, we're really saying that for a lot of the hardware switches and routers out there, they want to focus primarily on forwarding and just getting the data to its endpoint. It's very useful to collect this telemetry information, and that's what's new about IOAM, but we'd like to minimize the processing load and the difficulty of doing that within those nodes. And one way to do that is to do what we call raw export, which is kind of a minimal form of where you do as little processing as necessary to retrieve that IOAM data that's been collected and then export that in the simplest manner possible. So as you see in the figure on the right, the IOAM node is a switcher router that is just forwarding packets. You do the raw export is then allowing to offload a lot of the processing or aggregation or reformatting to an IOM data processing system. So we're just trying to get the information off the IOM node as simply as possible. And then from that, it is possible that after that IOM data processing system, it may do some formatting or aggregation or processing. It may do some interpretation. And from there, you may have something else that's going to progress that to a monitoring or analytics system. So this is really focused on that first light blue arrow on the bottom for raw export of IOM data. It is not focused on the processed or interpreted or aggregated IOM data, which is something that could be addressed and might be valuable, but that's not what this draft is trying to do. Next slide, please. So as we look at raw export, we really want to get just the telemetry information and some packet fields as well. So we want to be able to identify the packet or the flow. And for that, we're basically saying if you just take a chunk of the packet itself, involving a bunch of the headers, then you can figure out what the packet is. So as we looked at how we could do this, we found that IPFix is a possible answer. IPFix is a generic export protocol. So while initially it was primarily used for counters and meters and things like that, there was a packet sampling framework defined, and that exports chunks of packets. And we found that that is a pretty good match for what we want to do. And IPFix has these templates that allow you to construct fairly concise packet formats or formats for the exported packets, where you can add various fields that can help provide context, and could include the IOAM headers themselves. Now, because we want to support this at billions of packets per second at kind of crazy line rates, it's likely that an implementation that's using IPFix for export of IOAM is going to do a small subset of what IPFix normally does. So we're not talking a generic, define any template you want and go off and run with it. We're talking about supporting a small number of templates that are rather fixed, but the template can then describe to whoever's receiving this what that format is. And it allows a fair amount of flexibility that different implementations could use different IPFix templates, which allow them to optimize and support it well in hardware. And the systems receiving them would do the more flexible, the full IPFix implementation, and they could interpret it with various formats coming, say, from different vendors or so on. Next slide, please. So there's a bunch of information elements that are already defined for packet sampling. So a section of an IP header or a section of a data link frame or Ethernet. So some of those have been identified here. Next slide, please. So we're also proposing some new information elements to provide additional context or tell you something about the IOM encapsulation type. The 4 on the bottom are the actual IOAM information. So you just take that chunk that's already defined in the IPPM drafts and just throw it in an information element that you then include in IPFix. Next slide, please. And then there are some examples. You don't have to follow these formats, but these are examples of how you might do things. So you might just have an IP header packet section with the IOM embedded within. Next slide. Or you could include the IOM in front. In this example, you have the IOM data and then a few other fields and then the packet section so you know which packet or flow it is. Next slide. Also, we found some issues with alignment. So like 4-byte alignment is a big issue for a lot of hardware implementations. And when you have multiple information elements, with the existing IP packet section, if you have multiple information at once, it doesn't necessarily always have 4-byte alignment. So propose some things to try to optimize that. Next slide. Let's go to the next one. Look at that offline.
Next slide.
So this has been presented in IPPM before, and the question is, as we look at these issues and try to define this and progress this, does this topic make more sense in Opsawg or in IPPM? There's no real home for IPFix at the moment, I believe. So we're really asking if OpsAWG would be interested in progressing this work and soliciting technical input and feedback.
How many people have read this draft? Only 3 hands, and 2 of them are AD. A few more hands have gone up. Is there interest in doing this work in OpsAWG, this specific work around IPFix and IOAM? And we are okay. I think we'll take that to the list and ask that question there, Mickey. Thank you very much. We are well out of time, so please do read all of these drafts, and come to the list and comment. And with that, in the last 30 seconds, I'm handing things over to Ops area for our ADs.
All right, Ignas Bogdanas, before we switch, so IPFix has home in OpsAWG as basically a catch-all. Another option is that this might be an individual responsive document, if that's only this single piece of work.
Warren Kamari, also commenting on that. So I guess the big question is, where do you think it'll get more review? So far, it hasn't got a huge amount of discussion in OpsAWG. If you think it'll get more review in IPPM, then there's fine, but whatever people want.
If you want. Thank you, Mickey. Are there any questions for the Ops area directors? Open mic. With that then, unless Ignas or Warren, you want to say any closing remarks?
So one of the topics that was raised previously about mud and related work and where the home for that should be, and also similar activities in anima, possibly in security related working groups. Does the audience think that they would like to discuss this? Elliot wanted, but he had to leave. So anyone else interested in this topic? All right, any comments about that? So mud, the core of the mud work seems to be done. Now there are extensions. Similar thing is happening with Brusky. Brusky is being processed, but there is now incoming work on what was called Brusky profiles, extensions, uses, and other things. Onboarding in general is a topic of interest for the community. The question is, how large is that community? Do we need a central kind of a group, for the lack of a better word, which would coordinate that work? Or can that work be done fragmentedly in different places where that is now? So your thoughts?
Yeah, this is Chen from Huawei. I think for MAD work, actually, yeah, I agree there's a lot of relevant effort related to the IoT device management. It will be good to have a single place to talk about this. And I also have been aware there's a home gateway, home net working group. I'm not sure what's their scope. So since for this matter, a little bit cover a lot of the security part, onboarding, Brusky architecture is very complicated. I cannot have the whole picture, so I want to better understand the scope of this matter work.
For me, Joe Clark, similar. I don't mind the mud work happening in Ops Area Working Group as a working group chair, but it sounds like, and there is, a lot of side meetings, other aliases, other areas where there's interest. It might make sense to centralize that, to give that community a more focused ability to progress this work.
Okay.
Yeah, I would direct your attention to the comment on the chat from Darshak Thakur, who says, I believe there's a lot of interest in onboarding, and yes, a single place or group would be nice. HomeNet is probably the wrong place. So, I think you can interpret that how you want to.
All right, thanks for relaying. The question that I would have from my side is, having work spread in different places and grouped by topic probably results in a faster work on those components. If this becomes, if, for example, a new working group is established to kind of coordinate all of that work, wouldn't that result in a long but probably needed discussion on how to organize that, on framework documents, on kind of guidance, and less focus on the actual shipping products, specifications? Is that of a concern for the community?
Yeah, this is Jim again, actually. For this IoT related work, I want to see more IoT vendor or manager getting involved like that. So it's something we should think about that.
Yes, definitely.
Benoit Clay, so one thing we did in Opsawg in the past is that whenever we saw that we had like 3 or 4 documents in energy management, then a new charter was created by the AD to just create that charter. Now, to come back to your question on are you going to go through the series of requirements and framework and everything, it just depends what the ADs will put in the charter, right? And I think that lately there was like an IG statement telling that we don't have to go through in sequence requirements and frameworks and etc. So you could just target and say, this is what this group is supposed to do. So this is your choice.
Would not disagree with that, but that's up to the working group actually trying to adhere to that and doing something. And well, we have a really good history of overthinking about the problem space, not necessarily for bad reasons, but that takes a really long time. So the question is, if, for example, there are only extensions in a pipeline for mud, maybe it's more efficient to do that here, concentrated on mud. If there are extensions to Brewski, maybe it's more efficient to concentrate in Anima to address those extensions. If we are thinking about the all-encompassing coverage from architectural point of view, yes, that's probably a new working group and maybe even more. But the question, at what time there will be some tangible deliverables out of that. Right. So we are out of time, but please raise those concerns to the mailing list. And please voice your opinion. This is not only for ADs to think about that and then tell what for you to do. This is for you as a community to decide what you want to do.
As well, blue sheets, if you haven't signed them, I think they're floating around in the back of the room. Please sign them on your way out. And thank you very much.
And thanks.
At the very beginning, when Mark proposed the drafting this one group, I actually suggested to